Over the past 41 and a half years, I have met with dozens and dozens of couples who are planning their wedding. At our first meeting, because they are anxious, we always go over the wedding ceremony and the church rules and the church guidelines. And then we go over all the pomp and circumstance that is surrounding this service. And as I go through these steps, I look at the couple, and you can always see the anxiety and the tension rising in them as they begin to realize how many moving parts there are to a wedding. It's not uncommon for a bride and groom to say, as one did to me one night, they said, "Joel, what if the groomsman's tux comes in on Friday and it does not fit? Well, what do we do if the photographer doesn't show up on the day of the wedding on time? What happens if the air conditioner breaks down? What if? What if?" And I always look at the couple and say, relax. Everything you have just mentioned happened to Donna and me on our wedding in this very sanctuary. And I'm happy to say we're happily married still after 37 and a half years. And then I say to the couple, if everything goes without a hitch on your wedding, you're not going to remember anything much about it. But if something goes wrong, and if there are moments of confusion, yes, you will remember your wedding. I say to the couple, on the wedding, the day before our wedding, our brother-in-law left his tuxedo in his back seat while he was tubing down the Saluda River Rapids, and somebody stole his tuxedo. But yet our wedding still happened. During the weeks before our wedding, it became increasingly apparent that our photographer was not going to be who we had hoped he would be. He was causing all sorts of difficulties and not responding to our phone messages. Sadly, the week before the wedding, we had to send him a certified letter informing him that we no longer needed his services, and we paid him for what he had done. In the meantime, thanks to my uncle J.C. Kirkland, God bless his soul, Uncle Kirk was a principal at Cyril Busby Middle School, and he had recommended to us his friend who usually took pictures for his school kids each year. And we hired him on the spot, and he became a lifesaver for us. Unfortunately, the photographer that we had released never bothered to open the registered letter and showed up at our wedding on August the 8th, 1982. Needless to say, the confrontation was not exactly what we had hoped and had in mind a few moments before we took our wedding vow. And then after that, at the reception in the parlor here at Trenum Road, the AC quit working. Imagine that. 95 degrees, August the 8th. So having shared that information with the engaged couple, I said, so you see, nothing ever goes completely perfect on your wedding day. So relax. Donna and I remember everything that happened on our wedding day because of the confusion and the chaos. Nevertheless, from that confusion and chaos that began our wedding day, it became a day of celebration, and it has continued for 37 and a half years. Our wedding was a little bit like that first Easter, in that the day of Easter, the first Easter, began with chaos and confusion, but ended up in celebration. According to John's Gospel, while it was still dark on that very first Easter, Mary Magdalene got up from her room or her house, and she walked down the path to the tomb, perhaps to anoint Jesus' body with spices or to see him one last time. And as she walked down the path in the pre-dawn darkness, her mind was racing. She was so filled with grief, she could scarcely see ahead of her. For you see, when Jesus had died on the cross on Friday afternoon about 3 p.m., hope died with her. The Roman Empire, with all their power and authority, had authorized Jesus' crucifixion. And once again, as so many people had learned during these days, if you challenge the Roman Empire, if you question their authority, they will use their power to destroy you. Mary knew that as she walked along the path to the tomb, and she remembered how Jesus was a ray of hope for the people of Israel. She remembered the countless ways she had seen his teachings and observed his healings, and how the people, including her, had dare hoped that he was the Messiah. And now all those hopes that they had placed on Jesus were dashed Friday afternoon as Jesus was crucified on the cross as a traitor to Rome, as he died between two thieves. And as Mary walks to the tomb that Sunday, she is living in Good Friday. Or as an Episcopal pastor in Waynesville, North Carolina put it, Mary was looking at the world through crucifixion vision. Arriving at the tomb, she noticed that the massive stone had been rolled away from the entrance. The tomb was wide open, and she panicked, and she turned around and ran back up the hill to see Peter and the beloved disciple, and she hollered out to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have put him." Thus, the first Easter began in darkness, in chaos, and confusion. After hearing Mary's frantic words, Peter and the beloved disciple get up and impulsively run down toward the tomb. The beloved disciple beats Peter to the tomb, and he walks in, looks in, sees the empty cloths. And then a few moments later, Peter comes in and pushes by his friend and observes the linen wrappings that are rolled up. And the beloved disciple believes. And then they return home. Evidently, they pass Mary on their way back home as she's going back. And as I read this passage from John, I said, there is so much running back and forth from the tomb that Easter morning. They're running in chaos. They're running in confusion. They're running in grief. They're running because they don't know what else to do. So here's Mary at the tomb a second time. So enveloped in grief she really hardly notices the angels who were dressed in white sitting where Jesus had been laid. And they look at her and say, "Mary, why are you weeping?" And she says, well, in her Good Friday glasses, "They've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they have laid him." And then Mary turns around and bumps up with another gentleman who she assumed was the gardener. And she says to him, "Well, if you have carried him away, please tell me where you put him, and I will go get him." And with that, Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she recognizes him. And then Jesus said, "Go back and tell the disciples that I am soon ascending to my Father in heaven, your Father in heaven." Isn't it amazing that Easter Sunday begins in darkness and chaos and confusion, yet it ends in glory? For the first part of Easter, Mary and the disciples were viewing this day of all days through the lens of crucifixion. So much of our world continues to live with their Good Friday crucifixion glasses on, when we spend most of our time living in fear, when we allow death to be the final word, when we are constantly wanting to retreat back to the good old days when things were easier, when things were so much simpler. We're living with our Good Friday glasses on. But the Lord is calling us this Easter day to take off your Good Friday glasses and put on the lens of Easter and let us celebrate. There's a church in Pennsylvania that experienced so beautifully the difference between wearing Good Friday glasses and putting on Easter lens. The pastor of First Presbyterian Church in York, Pennsylvania, many years ago was Dr. Ernest Campbell. Dr. Campbell later became a seminary professor at Garrett Seminary in Evanston, Illinois, and he was one of my mother-in-law seminary professors, and he had a profound effect on her life shortly after Don and I were married. But years ago, Dr. Ernest Campbell had traveled to Scotland to the Iona community on the West Coast, and while he was there, he purchased this beautiful granite Celtic cross, brought it back with him, and presented it to his beloved congregation in York, Pennsylvania. And it was a beautiful day of dedication and celebration. And then somehow over the years, the cross had either been misplaced, but it was assumed to be lost. People talked about it. They remembered how beautiful it was, but yet they couldn't find it anywhere. So it was lost for so many years. On Good Friday, years later, as the current pastor was in the church on Good Friday morning preparing for the 12 o'clock service, he heard a knock on the front door of the church. Thinking it was a delivery person or a church member that had some sort of crisis, he opened the door. And to the pastor's surprise, it was one of the youth who was standing at the door soaking wet in the rain, but he had this huge smile on his face. For you see, some of these youth were doing a good deed on Good Friday. They were working in the church grounds, cleaning out an old garage that was soon to be torn down to make way for more parking for the church. And it was there while they were going through all the garbage in this garage that this young boy found in the midst of the rubble the cross, the Celtic cross that had been lost. And there it was found in the rainy gloom of Good Friday. And the church moved from Good Friday gloom to Easter celebration, because what they thought had been lost and gone forever has been found. My friends, I want you to know that Easter has not been lost this year. I want you to know that, sure, it feels very different to me. I'm standing in front of an empty congregation as I preach this sermon to you. If this were regular times, this sanctuary would be filled. We would be gathered in our Easter finest. Ladies would be in their pastel dresses and children in bonnets and beautiful clothes. Choirs will be singing their hearts out to God. Trumpet fanfare. Check on the trumpet fanfare. And I know it's hard for you right now to imagine all that, because some of us still have our Easter glasses on. Our Good Friday glasses. And we think our world is going to be quarantined forever. I understand. I miss looking out here and seeing all your beautiful smiling faces. I miss that so much. But Easter, like that Celtic cross, it's not lost. It's present right now. I ask you this day of celebration, take off those dark glasses of doom and crucifixion and put on your Easter lens so that you can remember with me that with God and with Christ, all things are possible. And for the rest of our lives, you and I are going to remember the Easter of 2020 because it was so different. Just like Don and our wedding. Things did not happen like we wanted them to. It was not perfect because there was chaos and confusion. But we're still here. We're still happily married. Never forget that first Easter was not the brightest of times. It wasn't Easter eggs and rainbows and pretty clothes. The first Easter was about a bunch of scared, broken, confused people who could not yet believe that God had taken and turned the shadows of death into daybreak. It was a day of big surprises. If God could bring Jesus Christ back from the dead, God is going to bring us through this pandemic. I want you to confront Good Friday. Do it if you haven't. And then I want you to put on your Easter glasses, because the only way out of darkness is to put on your Easter resurrection shades and then move ahead. Celebrate Easter with this service. Go out into your yards with your family and look for that beautiful flower blooming in your backyard or your front yard. Hide Easter eggs. For when you put on your Easter glasses, you are telling the world, love wins. Put on your resurrection glasses so you this day can be surprised by God, because God continues to be the God of surprises. And the one who leads the way is Christ. For Christ has risen. He has risen again, never to die again. Behold, the risen Lord, who goes before you, leading the way. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, my comfort watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches. I know He watches. I know He watches me.
Watching our program. We hope you got something meaningful from today's worship service. We appreciate any feedback that you may want to share with us. If you would like to support the ministries of our church, here's how to do so.